This morning is a perfect example of perfect timing, totally by chance. I got up this morning, decided I was going to go to Machu Picchu because the strike ended yesterday. I'm just going to walk around here and show you my place for the next 2 nights in Ollantaytambo. Went down to the train station by cab. Immediately got exactly the train schedule I wanted to go from Ollantaytambo to Machu Picchu, and then from Machu Picchu back to Cusco in 3 or 4 days. Then took the cab down to the Colectivo, which is just a place where you can get usually a taxi. The Colectivo is simply a taxi that's going a longer distance and will wait and take several people. And this one was going immediately to not Ollantaytambo, which I thought I was going to have to go, but when my taxi arrived, a guy walked up to the window and says, "Go direct Colectivo Ollantaytambo, direct Ollantaytambo." I said, "Yes." Jumped out, put my bag in there, jumped in the front seat, another guy jumped in, and we took off. Benefit of this is that I bypassed having to stop at an Ollantaytambo and take another cab or a Colectivo the rest of the way, which is not that far. When we went through Ollantaytambo, there was a big line waiting for, I assume, Colectivos going to Ollantaytambo. So I got off in the town square just as a wedding procession was going around and around, got out of the cab, saw the name of the hostel that I thought I might want to stay at, was my first choice, walked over to it. A few minutes later the owner came in, immediately gave me a room, 20 soles, which means about $6.50 a night, and here I am in this lovely room right here, right next to the square. And I might add, it's not even 10:30 yet. Okay, we just drove up a wicked road that got even more wicked. Probably not as good as the road you see over there in just a little car. Now we're quite a ways up, and now we start to actually do the hike. But this will give you an idea of the height and kind of area we're in. So we're going to be hiking up through these terraces. These buildings here are not the ruins, they're actually buildings for storing the products. I think I have enough of my breath that the camera won't shake too much. We are now at Pumamarca ruinas. Okay, this is the view that the Incas would have had from here. And you could ask, why would they want to be up this high? And there are probably at least 2 reasons. One, defense from the Spanish, although defense was not so much the issue as hiding, which is what Machu Picchu did. The second would be that there is, as you can see below, a lot of farming that goes on up on these high peaks. And so this would be a natural, kinda natural center place. And probably more importantly, the Incas believed very much in the sun and the sun god, and believed that the closer they got to their god, the more they were blessed and protected. But notice they're even higher up on the hill. Opposite us are more terraces. Having neither the time or even perhaps the skill, I'm not sure when this was built as compared to the Choy Concha that we were at in the city of Cusco, where they actually worked the individual rocks. Here they've just built these. They probably covered the outside with a plaster and maybe some painting. But you'll notice those niches there, somewhat trapezoidal. That is an allusion to what we saw in those earlier ruins. I'm pretty much standing at the entryway, so I'll just kind of slowly pan around. Where I'm standing is the entryway into what would be, at least at this point, the main plaza as near as I can tell. And there's my guide for the trip, Tommy. Notice the stone lintels. And notice on this building you can see the remains of some kind of external plastering. Here another view. I'm not sure that that's terracing that you see there as much as it may just be animals. They're animals. But here you can see an area that has some semblance of flatness. If I were to give the Peruvians' definition of flat enough to farm, it would be if we don't need technical climbing gear, it's flat enough.
When I shoot these flowers, I have to be careful not to stand up too fast.
Looks all the world like a dandelion, but it's not. We're at a pretty good elevation, which may be why these flowers are quite small. Appear, from my distance, to be versions of some of the larger flowers I photographed at the ruins in Cusco. Here's some more fortifications along a ridge in a contiguous valley. It reminds you of classic English or even the Chinese wall. The way it's set up as a barricade right on a very steep cliff, making it pretty protectable. Notice how the different kinds of farming, and notice there are different patches where different things are grown. The Incas were quite superb at tailoring their specific crops to the microclimates of elevation, moisture, and so forth. So they were actually able to do it on a terrace by terrace basis. Another storage building, and another what would have been some kind of a plaza or terrace. Notice also that there are trees through here, although my guess is they are cutting those down now and probably far too rapidly. This looks like a clover flower. Peering into one of the rooms again, the niches, the plaster, but it does not appear that there was a second floor to this. These are just very high ceiling. Whether they had some kind of ventilation holes up there or not, I don't know. Maybe that's what that difference in height represents. Here are a couple of views. Notice the large rocks, either by nature or by some stoneman, squared corners, and then here a corner pretty much finished off with plaster. You don't see the same quality of workmanship here that you do with the big stones, but that's because these may have shifted or may not have had the same quality. Now this room is different because, as you can see, there's a pass-through hole up there which may have been the ventilation that I was talking about. But then there are other secondary holes that do not appear to be ventilation, and my guess is, to correct my earlier statement, this room was 2 stories, or at least it had a lower ceiling than is implied by the top of that wall, because those holes there are perfect for shaped beams that could be used to support cross beams for the ceiling. Here I'm on the other side of the plaza to a room I think will give us even more insight. Notice the log lintel. It looks like fire has consumed part of that. Okay, and as we go in here you notice at this first level a whole row of wood. Now why they're cut off there I don't know. unless if we get a chance to look on the outside, we'll see that it was some kind of a balcony. On the other hand, firewood may be so valuable up here that they just cut it off and used it. Those do look like saw cuts rather than any other kind of cut. But this would suggest certainly the second floor idea. And there, a doorway into the second floor off of the main plaza. In several of the buildings there's digging around the base of the walls, and my guess is that this is the prelude to some archaeological work. I was looking at the walls in the hopes of seeing some indication of artwork on them, but I think they're too deteriorated for that. But it is interesting that many of the rock that's exposed above this first floor is black in color, and I wonder if that's from the fire, or was it from smoke of previous users, for example. Another architectural feature, notice that it has a lintel for that little air passage, but then it has a lintel of wood. And it may have been that it was a large window at one time, and then it was reduced in size by the air portal, or maybe for defensive reasons. Again, here you can see that there was a prior use to just that little vent. And in still another room we can see the logs for the window before there would have been any conversion to just that smaller air vent. And again here, the only thing I can notice is the wall is I think what you're seeing there are the handprints of the person who laid up that plaster. I don't know if these telemacro shots will show any fingerprints or anything like that. Here we're going to pass into another section through this hallway, but notice the slight, pretty consistent, so it seems intentional, lean to the right of this wall. Okay, I'm just going to pan through this area because I think it's telling in itself. And here you see the remains of a very large wall, particularly that straight ahead. That wall over there may have served also as a wall for some structures. But you can see that wall continuing all the way up to the top of this rise that I'm on right now. And presumably it dips over the side and down to those earlier defensive structures we saw in this valley over to the right. Certainly all through here probably would have been a series of buildings. What they were used for is the interesting question. And here we're getting a shot. Again, notice that just out of the rock, that's a pretty darn good straight wall for being several hundred years old. I'm going to probe down this walkway and see if in any way at all they've used the natural rock or included it, blended it into their architecture. It does appear to be a little plaza in itself right here, which is reminiscent of even modern houses that have their home built around a courtyard. You can almost imagine this would be like an intimate little neighborhood. Interesting big wall though in the middle of that room or building. Looks like two structures, smaller ones. One looks round, we'll probe that in a minute, but this big wall is directly in front of the opening on the second floor, so you would have walked in on it. Why it's there is a good question, but here is a natural chunk of rock that could have served a purpose. It's almost a slight little concave cup that one might find comfortable to sleep in, but perhaps to build a fire, who knows. Shelf. And all around in the walls are what I think are these orchids, but they are probably plants, I forget the name, that takes their water at least, if not their nutrition, from the air. Notice that in front of this building are what appear to be seats or benches, which would certainly add to the, call it mini park flavor, if you will. I'm always trying to project myself into the age that this context was, and I can imagine people sitting on that rock or cooking on it, kids playing on that rock unless it was considered sacred and the moss not to be disturbed. And here you can see that this wall to the left has been added, and I believe it takes us down to the next level, so we'll pursue it. So we're in like a little walkway right now. There's an entrance to a building, wouldn't be the second floor, but this looks like just a direct entryway down to probably a set of steps that I'll go down right now, the remnants of. And now we're on the lower part of this terrace. I don't know if that rope is original, but if it is, it might reflect how they put some kind of matting on the doorway as a door. And from that doorway, notice we're again in a tiny little plaza, if you will, with what appears to be a bench for that building, and then a bench here if this is just not refuse rock from the wall. And again, what an impressive piece of architecture natural this was for this little area. Here, another little plaza. There's probably a room here, a building. And notice that in spite of those defensive structures, this is pretty defensive. Someone being able to climb up this steep hill and then be able to effectively attack this wall seems improbable. Now notice my head is at the bottom of this row of wood, I think probably marked with archaeologicals notes. 16 looks like the number or brand. So that would suggest that, and so would those niches, that there's quite a bit of dirt beneath here and the original floor, and maybe quite a bit of archaeological artifacts. And here in this corner, just a little remnant of the logs that would have protruded out of the wall and made their way across to that wall. And this remnant of plaster or mud is quite smooth, has recent graffiti on it, but you can imagine that it provided a surface for some kind of painting. Now I'm climbing out of this area up to the next highest point, and my path is covered with natural outcroppings. Just like when I'm going through too many museums or churches, you begin after a while to only look for that which is unique, but this seems to be these recessed air portals. I wonder if they would have blocked those with stone just in inclement weather or something else. Again, looking past these stones up through the others to the what looks like it might be the highest most building. Well, it's not the highest building that there probably was, but it's, I think, the highest now, unless in what looks like a wall there are other structures. Notice here in this rock a natural little tinga, as the Anasazi would say, or the Navajo, but a little place that held water. And in a moment I'll sit on that rock with my feet down there and show you the view that probably thousands and thousands of Inca had. Certainly in the quiet contemplative moments or romantic moments, people would sit here. Okay, defensively what we're looking at is another steep wall overlooking a very steep embankment down to that original terrace, if you will, that has its own battlements. And that looks as though there was some kind of either building there that was long and narrow, or at least a terraced area and perhaps another terraced area a little bit farther up, or a continuation of that line of narrow buildings along beneath us here. Notice also that the niches were plastered. I don't know of any American Aborigines other than the sheep eaters of Jackson that called the high peaks their home. Now, as I pan this wall, you may be able to notice that it has the same or a similar zigzag design that the main wall at Sexy Woman had. There you can see one of the most necessary prerequisites to any large complex anywhere in the world: water. And I can't see more of it except for a trough coming down there, which I suspect is man-made. I'm also guessing that all around me is terracing, that it's not made by animals. It may not be used for crops today, but it may well have been heavily agriculture when the Incas occupied this site. Notice the thickness of these walls. Yeah, I'm standing on top of this wall looking back down where I've come, and you can see that there is either a large structure or a series of buildings to the left and the defensive wall going along the right. And there you can see the defensive wall zigzagging down. Notice the terracing that is still used today. That's quite flat. But still, it's obvious where the terraces have been in the past. I have such a fascination for these flowers. Wish I knew something about them.
Some kind of mold or fungus. So incredibly tiny, probably a quarter of an inch at max.
Such a variety of flowers at this altitude with this. Of course, they have a great deal of water. Okay, here's another closer look at these terraces, and you'll notice that there are some fairly sizable little pieces of land. Now these are used right here, but I'm sure when the Incas used this, it was very neat and very well defined. But you can imagine that once you're up here, your life can exist up here, and there's no real need probably to spend much time at the bottom. You've got water, you can grow your foods, you have your animals. Nevertheless, it's impressive. This looks like some kind of thistle. Okay, here we're at the corner of that defensive wall and what looks like it might have been a large plaza area, although there could have been buildings just cascading right down almost to that defensive wall that no longer have any evidence showing. This is Tommy coming to get me so we can return to Ollantaytambo. All along this building were these windows. Okay, now we're entering into a granero, and as you'll see in a moment, this is a circular granary. It was in this building, and who knows how high it went, but it would be similar to the other structures we saw for storage, that they would have stored maize and any of the other kinds of grain that they wanted to protect. This would have been an extremely important attribute. And these are the people, mestizos, who work some of this land and, as you can see from what she's carrying, sell what they can to the tourists. Now notice two things here. One, the thatched roof on that old barn. The other buildings are using clay shingles or tiles. And also notice right here, it looks very similar, if in fact it's not part of the original Inca water system. Okay, here in front of me you can see some of the walls of the original Inca terracing, and I'll just slowly tell a photo up so you can see that they continue right on up there. Not much used anymore. Here's an example of original Inca channel, wider than what we saw in town, but doing exactly the same function. Whether this was, it looks like it was purposely designed as a way of funneling water off to the side. Here, a bridge of stone slab. Here, just another view of the valley as we make our way back to Ollantaytambo. Notice how big the supporting wall is to make sure that this corner doesn't break down. The hole that you see on the right, and there are a couple more in that face, are Inca cemeterial burial holes, if you will, tombs. And there are a few more up there, I believe, long ago raided for whatever they might have contained. Okay, from this view you can see that there are two, then you can see others. One right there in the center right about now. A couple up into here. Just walking down we encountered some more terracing that's original. So when in the early days it must have been all over the place with lots of verduras, vegetables growing everywhere. Looks like a milkweed plant of some sort. There's a gorgeous rich color. Another close-up view of the original stairway going up through the middle of a terraced area. Right above us is a terrace. There's a wall. We're walking on a relatively narrow terrace. another relatively narrow terrace, and there a terrace with the remains of what may not have been an Inca building. Actually, it may have been one of the square storage buildings. But you notice tremendous amount of investment, probably related the amount of work that was going to be required to put in a wall versus the amount of dirt that it would take if they made the space for the terrace wider. You have to wonder if this ground is still fertile enough, it certainly looks like it, to allow for continued use, and if so, why isn't it being used? Now notice here are two rocks protruding out. My guess is that they were used to climb up from one area to another when you weren't near the stairs. Now if you look at this wall, see there's the first one, second, third, hole for the fourth, and there's the fifth one that tree is almost pushing out. Another spectacular view that gives a real good idea of what the terracing looked like, because so much of this still exists. Some of it probably still being used. Now just another view of this valley that we're going down in as we go back to Ollantaytambo. Now here water comes down through there. This channel comes in from the right, goes underneath the footpath, but notice by running this water as they do here along this upper level, you could then irrigate at any point you wanted to in this whole basin. So the technology is much richer than it looks at first glance, even when at first glance it's very impressive. Notice something here. Notice the thickness of the wall, and yet it's only another 8 or 10 feet to the wall. So tremendous investment just to get 8 feet of growable, arable land. That's actually some kind of a vine that has some kind of a fruit and a very, very pretty flower. This is kind of like, I think, our century cactus. You can see the cactus there that once every X number of years it shoots up a single sprout, although this one's different. It looks more tree-like and even has little mini branches. Looks like it's going to break out with leaves or flowers or something sometime. Okay, one last shot of this valley before we're out of it. Gives you a little idea of the height, but we're probably almost a third of the way down from where we were when I first videoed these terraces, and that's right where the trail is. You can see it there. There's another cactus with some kind of interesting bloom on it. It seems funny to see cactus this high up. Here's a closer look at the forest that they have here, the trees. I imagine tremendous amounts of these have been cut down over the centuries, so not much remains. A little bit different looking pine trees. Notice how they kind of grow up a single stalk, and then at the very top they branch out, although others seem to look like a regular tree. They're cutting them down. Several of them cut down just sitting here. Haven't seen many butterflies. This is the first. Another view of probably what's a natural forest. We're getting near town, and I realized a long time ago I could have come the rest of this distance myself. So I paid my good guide, and he's off on his own, and I'll just kind of straggle back to town. In the meantime, I can enjoy being out here by myself. This is extremely rugged country. I wonder if these people who live down there perceive that they have a much nicer lifestyle than if they lived in a place like Cusco. It looks like a satellite dish, but I can't imagine you could get any satellite TV as deep in the hole as they are here. We came just a few minutes ago from over there, but even as I pan down, you'll see that there were use of every single viable piece of land that you could turn into agriculture. Of course, when you get to the bottom, it's relatively flat. This is a side canyon dropping down into the main one that we've been traversing. Here, more Inca terraces. Some person's house probably works these terraces below. There's the valley I'll be walking back down through to get to Ollantaytambo. There's the road, and I think what that is over there would be closer to it, I'm betting, is going to be a resort hotel. But I don't think the road is good enough to get to it. Now what's interesting is notice how on the right it's kind of circular like an amphitheater, and then on the left it kind of cascades straight down. And that is continued down below here, where we see at least 2, if not 3 or 4 different kind of designs of space. I'm guessing that this edifice is the entrance to this resort area, and probably that whoever is building the resort area has the clout to get the government to build a nice road up to it. One of the benefits of these incredible volume of terraces walls is that it creates a natural roadway. This is what I like doing most, being on my own going for a walk. My guess is that this will be the water storage tank for the resort, and probably house some kind of purification capability. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8. Here on the hill, almost to the bottom, is another Inca ruin. Notice the size of these walls, the height. 2, 3, 4 stories maybe. I'm here at about 6:45. That, believe it or not, is the church bell. Those are some ruins I may try to hike up to later today. But the ones I'm here to see this morning are Ollantaytambo. I've seen some tourist buses, but they haven't invaded yet, and I'm going to see if I can bribe my way into this place. I'm told by a fellow who spent a lot of time in the United States and very polished looking, speaks English quite well, that these were not forts, that they were solely places people lived, and they stored their grain and they lived. And the outlying valleys and so forth was where all of the agricultural took place, although obviously here are more terraces. However, it's hard for me to imagine that in such a place there wasn't some defensive function. This building looks very much like the one I'll pan across in a moment. And if it's as the man said these are, the ones across immediately across the valley, these were simply granaries. put up high because the Inca believed, number one, that the higher they could get, the more God blessed them. And also, as a very practical matter, curiously, this area down below here is considered to be wet, whereas that's considered to be much drier, although clouds come through on a continuing basis, so who knows.